In this episode of Viral Rewind, we're going to look at the Maldal Windows worm. Now, there's a couple different variants of this worm. This one we're looking at is the A variant, or the first one of it. There's another variant that does a little bit of different stuff, but this is the original one here. Okay, and being an email worm, it comes in through your email, and it technically, or usually has the subject line of somebody has become a millionaire or something like that, and then the body of the message pretty much follows that same example, talking about being a millionaire, getting money, etc., etc. And then it has an attachment called Luckey, or Luckey, which is got the same icon as the Maldal worm here. And when you were running it, we got a little notification sound. We heard our floppy drive activate. So it was trying to do something with the floppy drive there. And now our hard disk indicator light is starting to go quite a bit, and the system performance is starting to lag here. So another thing about Maldal, before we see what exactly is going on here, is Maldal is kind of a political worm. I believe it was written in 2002, and it originated out of South Africa. We'll see a little later why it's believed to originate out of South Africa, but the reason it's kind of a politically driven computer worm is because it focuses on George W. Bush, which is the U.S. president at that time period, along with, I believe, Ariel Sharoon, which was the Prime Minister of Israel, and a couple of other things, because they're all referenced in the worm here. So let me refresh the desktop. And now we have a whole bunch of these Sharoon. Of course, Sharon is actually S-H-A-R-O-N, but they misspelled it as Sharoon here. And you see it's a whole bunch of copies of Maldal, but they've all just been called Sharoon, and they all have numbers. And what Maldal does is it essentially copies itself in the present directory that it's run from. So we ran it from the desktop here, and it's attempting to replicate itself about 10,000 times, and it just increments 1 to each copy, so that's why they all go up in number. And the copies that it makes, again, the reason I say it's kind of derived in the worm, being political, talking about Bush and the Prime Minister of Israel, is it's got the names Bush with all the numbers, it's got Sharoon like we have here with all the numbers, it's got ZA Union, which is a reference to the South African Union, and it also has references to BinLadin, that's the other one. So there's 4 different naming conventions that Maldal uses in its replication here, and again it just adds a number from 1 to 9,999. So, kidding. I can get to desktop here. How many did it say we have? 1,152 objects. Let's refresh. (1,228 objects. So yeah, it is continuing to replicate. Yes, delete all of it. Yeah, we know it's a program. Oh, of course, it will not allow me to delete it because it's in use. That's a little inconvenient, isn't it? Yes, yes, yes. And it's obvious that we have degraded system performance here because now it's taking several minutes just to delete all the copies of Maldal here that I can while it's still actively replicating more of them. So you see the problem with this worm here. It's not really destructive to your computer files. Again, all Maldal does is wherever you run it from, it just creates multiple copies of itself over and over until either your computer runs out of disk space or it hits that 10,000 copy limit. And so you get again, severe degradation of system performance here with all the hard drive activity. Now, one other feature of Maldal here that I'm not showing but is also possible, which explains the access of the floppy drive when we started, is Maldal will also try to look for an unprotected floppy disk, meaning it's not write protected. And what it will do is it will make a copy of itself called Malal, M-A-L-A-L to that, and then it will start replicating Malal over and over on the floppy disk, but it will do it in a different manner, where instead of incrementing it with numbers and different names, it just creates multiple copies of Malal, but in order to differentiate the copies, it just adds .exe to the end of the name each time. So you'll get Malal.exe, and then Malal.exe.exe, then Malal.exe.exe.exe, and it goes on and on and on. So, again, that's the first variant of Maldal, and it's got two operations depending whether it's run from a hard disk on the computer or if it's run off of a floppy disk in a machine. But again, in both cases, all it does is replicate, take up disk space and computer resources, but ultimately it does not damage your files. It's just more of a nuisance than anything else. So that's pretty much it for the Maldal Windows worm.